we're going to learn to make these fingerless mitts. They're called Align mitts, and they're designed by Courtney Spainhauer of Pink Brutus Knits. If you'd like to get your free copy of this pattern to follow along, you can click here to visit my website, where you will also see links to Courtney and her other designs on Ravelry and her website and everything else. These are pretty great fingerless mitts. These are a pair that I've happened to modify for myself. I've made them a little bit longer with a longer thumb. They're knit using sock yarn and pretty small needles. And if you've never worked with double pointed needles before, I have another pattern called Easy Fingerless Mitts. I'll give you a link here as well as on my website. And those are maybe a good place to start because they're bigger needles, thicker yarn. They knit up really quickly, and then once you get the skills and you feel comfortable, these would be good to move on to. These are different than the Easy Fingerless Mitts pattern I have because these actually have a thumb, and they're made of a really fine fabric, the sock yarn. Like I said, this pair I've modified a bit. They're super easy to modify. This is what they look like, totally unmodified. And they happen to look great with my nail polish color. They're still pretty great, and I weighed these finished mitts, and they're 33 grams, which means in theory you can get a beautiful hank of sock yarn and make 3 pair of these out of 1 hank of sock yarn. You have to keep close tabs on your measurements, I suppose. But these are a little bit shorter in the hand, a little bit shorter in the cuff, and shorter in the thumb. I'm sure that, I mean, they're comfortable and they're fine. I wanted a long pair, a luxurious pair for winter. So before we get started on these, Courtney has written this pattern for double pointed needles, but if you are comfortable with magic loop, these work fine in magic loop, although you may want to switch to double pointed needles when you're working the thumb. If you are comfortable working 2 at a time, these are a good choice for that, but you might want to work 1 at a time when you're doing the thumb. It's just tough to do a long circular needle when you have so few stitches on the needle, but I think double pointed needles are easier for that. So get your sock yarn and your needles and your free copy of the pattern, and in the next video we're going to cast on. We're going to start out with the cast on, and like I said, Courtney's written this pattern for double pointed needles, and in the pattern you'll see she refers to the different needles as N, 1, 2, and 3. You're going to use 3 double-pointed needles with an extra to knit onto. So when you see N1, it's the first needle after the beginning of the round. N2 is the second needle, N3 is the third needle. And if you're going to knit this magic loop, you can separate the halves of half the stitches on one side, half on the other. That'd be needle 1 and needles 2 and 3. Just a little pointer for you magic loop knitters. So let's go ahead and take a look at the cast on. I'm going to actually walk you through, if you've never cast on to double pointed needles before, I'm going to show you how to do that and to keep the stitches from getting twisted. So let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, we have needle 1 here. This is where I started casting on, and Courtney has us casting on 25 onto this needle and 13 onto the next needle, and the third needle needs 12. And so I'm going to use the long tail cast on and cast on directly onto this third needle. And you can put all of the stitches on one needle and slide them over, but if you can get good at this, it'll save you a little time. I'm using long tail cast on. The not slingshot method is what I'll call it. I'll give you a link here to how I do the long tail cast on. Make a loop, put the new needle in, wrap it and pull it through, tighten it up. You want to minimize the gap between the 2 needles there. So I'm going to do this 12 times, making a ton of noise with the double pointed needles. Whoops, I missed that one. Okay. There we go. Now to get started with double pointed needles, get yourself untangled and set your needles out. Untwist if you have to, making sure that all the knots are on the inside like this. and your working yarn and your tail end are coming from the needle over here on the left side. What's going to happen is I'm going to knit this first stitch using the working yarn from over here, and when I do that, I will close up the loop and we'll be knitting in a tube. So I'm going to twist this around and get the first stitch in front of me and scoot the stitches down to the tip of the needle. The reason I'm doing everything on the surface is I don't want things to get twisted, and as soon as you pick things up, things can flop around and get twisted. Oh, I should also note, I always work with much heavier yarn and chunkier needles than the pattern calls for demonstration reasons. These needles are way bigger than the needles the pattern uses, and this yarn is far chunkier. But it makes it easier for you to see. So my working yarn is on top over here. My tail end's kind of under this way. I'm going to lift up this needle one a little bit and put my empty needle into that stitch, grab the working yarn, and then you can lift the whole thing off the table as you wrap and pull it through and really put a lot of tension on that first stitch to eliminate the gap. It's likely you're going to end up with a gap between the first and third needles, but on subsequent rounds, I promise you it will look better. Okay, so needle one is 1 by 1 ribbing, meaning we knit the first stitch, purl the second stitch, and we repeat knit purl all the way across. So to work a purl stitch next, I'm going to pull the yarn forward between the two needles to purl, and pull the yarn back between the two needles to knit. Forward to purl. If you forget to yarn forward to purl or back to knit, you'll end up with a yarn over. And if you treat that yarn over as a stitch, your stitch count will increase. Now here I am with my yarn in front, I'm ready to knit. If I leave the yarn in front and don't pull it back to knit, and I work the next stitch, you see I've just put an extra loop on the needle. If I treat that as a stitch on the next round, I will have increased by 1 and thrown my ribbing off. So even if you have to go slowly on this needle, make sure you're yarning forward to purl and yarning back to knit. I want to finish up this needle to show you how to move on to a second needle when you're working double pointed needles. These bamboo needles sound like wind chimes. Because we have an odd number of stitches on needle 1, you're going to end with a knit 1. Okay, when you're working double pointed needles, you always end up with an empty needle in your left hand. Put that needle in your right hand, and wherever your working yarn is, your next stitch is always to the left. So here's my working yarn, here's my next stitch. And needles 2 and 3 are just plain knitting. And that you can get by without me demonstrating that. Now, the beginning of the round in these mitts is easy to find, not only because you have so many stitches on the first needle compared to 2 and 3, but because where the tail end is hanging between those two needles, that's the beginning of your round. That'll help you stay on track as you work through the pattern. So that's all knitting the cuff is just going around and around, working 1 by 1 rib on needle 1 and plain knitting on needles 2 and 3. Keep knitting the cuff as long as you like, and then next up we're going to talk about the thumb gusset. Once you get the cuff of the mitt knit as long as you want it, you're ready to move on to the thumb gusset. And that's what gives these mitts a really nice fit is the way the thumb is knit up to accommodate the base of the thumb. Let's go ahead and take a close look at what it looks like finished. I'm going to put it on so you can really see it. You see we have these nice increases. These are actually make one stitches. It's a little bit decorative looking. Also gives us a really great fit on these mitts. Okay, Again, I have a super bulky piece here to demonstrate how this works. Following the pattern, the first thing you do is you knit purl 6 times. The thumb gusset appears right in the middle of needle 1. Okay, then this is where the increasing starts. I like to use markers when I'm working any thumb gussets or any gussets. Put a marker on the right needle, and so all of the increases are going to happen between the 2 markers that we make. The first increase that we do is a make 1 left, and I'm going to give you a slow demonstration of this in a moment. And then we're going to knit 1 and work a make 1 right, and then place a marker. That's essentially what you're going to do on every other round, is to do a make 1 left, knit the stitches until, well, you slip the marker, do a make 1 left, knit all the stitches up to the last stitch before the marker, make 1 right, and then slip the marker. And these are just a reminder so you don't have to count 12 stitches before you do the increase, because we can all get distracted while we're knitting, and that helps keep you on track. Now, a review of the make 1 stitches. A make 1 left, I like to use the right needle to pick the yarn up and put it onto the left needle. You want to pick this yarn up from front to back, so it's looped over this way on that needle, and then you want to knit the stitch through the back loop. It's hard to get your needle in there, and that's how you know you're working a make 1 stitch properly. If it's easy to get the needle in there, you're probably not doing it correctly. It's going to leave a hole in your work. If you can get the needle in there just like this, that's fine. I like to put it in the front and then roll it over for a make 1 left. I'll show you that to you one more time. Pull up the bar between the 2 stitches, put it on the left needle from front to back, knit that stitch through the back loop. A make 1 right, it's very similar. Pick up this bar between 2 stitches and put it on the left needle from back to front. And then you want to knit this normally through the front loop. It is tricky to get your needle in here. What I like to do is to use my first finger to create some slack. See, like that? I can get my needle in there, wrap it, and pull it through. Do that one more time. I'm putting a knit stitch between the 2, just because it's hard to work 2 make 1s next to each other. Put the bar between the stitches on the left needle from back to front, and create some slack on that stitch to knit the stitch normally from through the front loop. Okay, and the make 1s will slow you down, but that's how you know you're doing it correctly, is if they're a pain in the neck to work. Okay, so you have your increases worked that way. That's really all it is. The rest of the mitt is worked the same way it was through the cuff. You're going to work ribbing the rest of the way across needle 1, and then knit on both needles 2 and 3. And you're going to keep working the increase round until you have 17 stitches between the markers. And then once you have 17 stitches between the markers, you're ready to slip, I think I have some extra yarn here. You're ready to slip the gusset stitches onto scrap yarn and continue on with the rest of the hand. So we're going to pretend my working yarn isn't here. We're going to pretend I have 17 stitches between the markers. I want to show you how this works. I'm going to work up to the first marker here. I can remove the first marker, and I need a tapestry needle and some yarn in a contrasting color. Just a little bit of yarn. I just have like a foot here, which is a lot. So here I have my 17 stitches increased along here. I'm going to slide these stitches onto the scrap piece of yarn and remove the last marker. Now my thumb gusset stitches are held safely. I'm going to do the backwards loop cast on to cast on one stitch onto this left needle. Actually, let me make sure that it's one stitch and not two. Yep, it's cast on one stitch. Okay, so this is the kind of cast on that you do when you only have one strand of yarn to work with, and we're just going to cover a gap here where the thumb gusset stitches used to be. Hold the yarn in your left hand and put your thumb on the yarn like this, and then flip. Then slide that loop onto the right needle. It's kind of a fakey cast on stitch. It's not very strong, but it gets us through what we need right here. So then I'm going to just work the rest of this in normal ribbing, the way I've established it already. And you continue on with those gusset stitches just hanging there in the scrap yarn. In fact, if you actually do knit up to 17, it looks like this. Not this bulky, but it looks like this. You're going to continue working the hand the way that you did, exactly the way you did with the cuff, just ignoring the thumb gusset stitches. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about binding off in pattern and tidy finishing work. Once you get the hand close to the length you like, you're going to want to work all 3 needles in 1x1 rib for a little bit, and you can just follow the pattern. Courtney tells you exactly when to switch to 1x1 rib. And then the cuff of the mitts is bound off using a technique called binding off in pattern. And there are 2 reasons for that. One reason is that it gives us a bind off that's more in line with the rest of the knitting up to that point. It also gives a little more stretch to the bind offs. It's not as stiff. So it's decorative and functional. I'm going to show you how to bind off in pattern, and I'm going to show you how to do some tidy finishing work when you're weaving in the ends. Let's go ahead and take a look. I've knit my jumbo mitt up to the space where I'm ready to bind off. You can see I have my ribbing here, but then I've also worked a little bit of ribbing for the very top of the cuff. And you can see on the mitts that I've knit for myself, I've given an inch. It must be what Courtney says too, because that's what I have, about an inch of ribbing here on the ones I knit exactly to pattern. Okay, so binding off in pattern is not a difficult technique. Once you learn it, you'll probably use it every time you want to bind off something in ribbing. A regular bind off is just knitting all the way across and flipping one stitch over the other as you work. This, you're just going to work the stitch as you see it. I just knit one. I know the next stitch is purl one. And then once I have 2 stitches on the right needle, I pull one over the other in a normal bind off way. The next stitch is a knit, so I knit it and bind off. The next stitch is a purl. So I yarn forward, purl it, and bind off. Knit, bind off, purl, bind off. Not difficult to work, and it really makes a big difference in how the bind off looks when you're working ribbing. And I almost just did the wrong stitch. Just as a review, I almost did a wrong stitch, and then I looked and saw that it was a knit stitch and not a purl. Purl stitches look like they have a little scarf around their neck, and knit stitches are V-shaped. So I know my next stitch is a purl here, and then the following is a knit. As if I didn't know that already by working a million of them already. Oops, a knit stitch. It's a good idea to watch what you're doing, obviously. Okay, that's how that's going to go. And there's my finished bind off. It looks really good, and there is some good stretch to it. I'm actually going to take these needles out. Don't panic. I'll put them back in. I just don't want them clunking around while I show you this bit. The very top and bottom cuffs, you're going to have two ends. This was our tail end from the cast on. And when you're knitting in the round, you are knitting in a tube, but you're actually knitting in a spiral. And that becomes super apparent when you look at, like, the cast on row here. Half of it is a row below the other half of it. And when we weave in this end, we can help even that out. It's just some tidy finishing work. So I need a tapestry needle for this. I can feel my slip knot over here from my cast on. You see the cast on is a series of V's. It looks like the bind off row we just did. A series of V's running all the way around. We want to make one more V. We want to make it in line with all of these other V's and straighten out this stair step at the same time. So I'm going to go under the V right behind the slip knot, pull that through, and then go back down into about the same place as I came out of for this. You can mess around with it and make sure it looks good. You can always take it out. Sometimes the slip knot pops out. But I've essentially just made a V that looks like the other ones, and it runs in line with everything else. And once I get the slip knot where I want it, it should stay pretty well. Look how well that's smoothed out. And then I'm going to flip this inside out and just weave in the end normally, using the umbrellas and smiles method. I'm just going to do this really quickly. If you aren't familiar with weaving in ends in reverse stockinette, I'll give you a link to my weaving in ends video right here. And you too can learn about umbrellas and smiles. Okay, now that's good, so I can just cut this short, not worry about it anymore. We have some tidy finishing work on the cuff. I'll do the same thing at this bind off. Next up, we have the last little bit of knitting to do, which is the thumb. The last little bit of knitting we have to do is the thumb. And you've bound off the hand, you have a few live stitches on scrap yarn, and that's what makes these gloves so nice, really, is the thumb and the fact that you can modify it. It's very few stitches, very few rows. Let's go ahead and take a look. Here's my big, ridiculous, bulky piece. I'm going to give you some pointers here for following the pattern and a few extra things so that you're set up perfectly for having an even number of stitches on each needle and being set up with an even number of stitches on each needle for knitting the ribbing. So I'm going to take my needle and just slide it along the scrap yarn, starting here at the base of the thumb on the right side. Put 8 stitches on the first needle. Grab it again. Put 6 stitches on the second needle. Trust me here, it's going to sound weird. And then 3 on the third. Now I'm glad this happened because I want to show you like the worst thing that can happen when you're sliding stitches back onto the needle. You see my scrap yarn goes down and comes back. The stitch appears to be gone, lost in oblivion. This is why we really want to use a contrasting color of yarn so you can see when this happens. I'm going to take my tapestry needle and pull the scrap yarn a little bit and grab it with the other end here. Hold on to the base of the stitch and pop that stitch out. And now I can see it and put it up on the needle. This happens sometimes with the first and last stitch. It only happened with the last stitch for me, but you can use the scrap yarn to kind of be a handle to pull the stitch out so you can reach it. Okay, and now we're going to go around working in the round again to knit the tiny thumb. First by attaching the yarn here on needle 1. To attach a new ball of yarn, you're just going to put your needle into the first stitch take your working yarn and just kind of flop it over like this, making a loop on your first finger. Put that loop on the back needle and pull it through. And you are attached once that happens. Put it into the next stitch and drop the tail end and then knit across. Okay, and then just like you were doing with the hand and the cuff and everything else, your next needle is here to the left of the working yarn. And your third needle only has 3 stitches on it. But we're going to change that. And twist it here. There we go. Okay, now we need to pick up and knit 3 stitches over this gap. This is the gap where we did a backwards loop cast on when we put the thumb stitches on scrap yarn. We want to close up this gap by picking up and knitting 3 stitches. So I dropped my other needle. I'm going to work directly onto this needle. And what you do is you take a look and think about where you want to put the first stitch. You kind of want them to be even. Yeah, you want them to be even, but you really mostly want to pick a spot that isn't going to pull like crazy. Like if I picked up this right here, that would leave a giant gaping hole. So I want to pick up 2 strands of something, put my needle in there, wrap it and pull it through, and then look at it, give it a tug. And that looks good. It's not leaving a giant hole. And then I'll look for the second one, where I want to place the second one. I'm going to try it here. But if you don't like the way it looks, you just pop the stitch back out and try somewhere else. That also looks very good. I'm going to mess up this next one on purpose. That looks terrible. Look at that giant gap. I'm going to drop that one and try again. I just wanted to show you how easy it was just to drop the stitch and find a different place. Okay, that's my 3rd stitch. And that looks good. And one more trick that I like to do, this whole thing with knitting with just a few stitches on DPNs, it can be kind of fiddly, but you can make it less fiddly after you've done 1 round. You have your tail end and your working yarn, and tie those 2 together in a pretty snug knot. This gives you a chance to tuck the tail end of the yarn into the mitt, so that's one less thing flopping around causing problems, and it helps the gap here between the first needle and the 3rd needle. Just follow the pattern to finish knitting the thumb. Just like on the hand, you're going to knit in stockinette for a few rows, plain knitting, and then switch to 1 by 1 rib, bind off in pattern, and then do the same tidy finishing work that we did on the cuff of the mitt. One last thing, if you are knitting these one at a time, which is kind of the normal way to do it, you want to be sure to keep note or count afterwards the exact number of rows that you used for the hand, for the cuff, for the thumb. If you've done any modifications at all, you don't just want to guess and measure. For the mitts to really match each other, if you've done 40 rows for the hand, make sure you do 40, or for the cuff, make sure you do 40 rows for the second glove. And that actually will not only make them perfect, but it'll give you an idea of exactly how much yarn you have left to work more gloves just like them from the same ball of yarn. Anyway, that's all I have for you. Many thanks to Courtney Spainhauer from Pink Brutus Knits for letting us use her pattern. Good luck.